there's plenty of evidence that she's a very difficult employer. And I can understand that because, as we've discussed before, the Sussexes are sort of always on the turning point. They're always about to do something different. They have to keep themselves in the public eye, and so they're always sort of taking on new endeavours, some of which work better than others. And quite a lot of them, of course, recently haven't worked terribly well. And so at that point, of course, people get very frustrated. And then if they're not used to handling staff and sort of, I'm going to say some people are very well brought up to do it and they know how to do that. And it seems that Meghan Markle is not very good at this sort of thing. That's when the tensions come out and people start screaming and shouting at each other. When everything's going well, there's no reason to do that. But the moment something goes wrong, it's when you really have to be on your best behavior.
All right, this latest story surrounding and is raising some serious questions about what's happening behind the scenes. Reports and commentary about staff turnover around the Sussexes are once again making headlines. And one particular quote is getting a lot of attention. There's a way to make people feel special. Then there's the Sussexes. Now that's a pretty sharp line. So what's actually going on here? Is there really a staffing crisis around Harry and Meghan? Or is this another example of criticism being amplified because of who they are? So over the past few years, there's been a lot of discussion about staff departures connected to Harry and Meghan. Both during their time as working royals, and afterward, multiple aides, advisors, and team members reportedly moved on from roles connected to the Sussexes. Now, staff turnover by itself isn't automatically unusual. High-profile public figures often have teams that change over time.
And it seems to me that she isn't. I would say, on balance, she's a very difficult employer, and there's plenty of evidence of people who have left her. So the only thing which might be interesting to consider about what Ashley Hansen is doing is that she is setting up her own enterprise. They are coming with her. If anything goes wrong, she is set up and she can progress on her own without them. When she was living at Frogmore Cottage and she was extremely rude to one of the sub-gardeners, and he complained to the head gardener who went to see the Queen, and the Queen went down and ticked her off. I mean, I've told that story before, but that's a very bad sign because there's no reason to be rude to gardeners or anybody come to that, actually. And a lot of people who are sometimes paying quite a lot of money for people to work for them, still nevertheless couch all their requests as, if you possibly have time to do this, or could you look into this for me? I'd be frightfully grateful if you could. That's the way you do it. And that's the way you get people, to feel special. If you shout at them, of course, they don't feel special at all. But you know as well as I do that there've been a whole string of people who, for one reason or another, have decided that the Sussexes are not for them, and they're going to go and do something else. And so there is a pattern which doesn't look very positive. I do think that they are in a state of flux, if you like, or a state of change the whole time, which comes back to the same point, which is that they continually have to reinvent themselves and they have to continue to keep relevant. So I think that every now and again they jump at what appears to be a wonderful idea, and it doesn't always turn out to be quite as wonderful as they'd hoped, at which point we see another thing going wrong. We've talked a little bit recently about what is going on, with him going out on solo engagements. And it may just be that she's looking after the children at home. He's got certain things to do. He gets on and does them. And the things that he's done recently, the ones like with his visit to London and the visit to Africa, seem to have been much more the old Harry, putting things out rather than taking things in, and seem to me not particularly commercially orientated, which I think is a very good thing. But of course, it could be a strategy, who knows, in order to sort of up his profile a bit, in order that they can commercialize it later on. I don't know. They do need, obviously, to earn money. That's the route they've taken. They reckon that by leaving the royal family, by leaving the royal family and not asking for any support, as it were, from them, that they could, be independent and earn a good living and make, their contribution. And I'm not sure, to be honest, how successful that has been. I'm sure it was at the beginning, or how successful it's likely to be in the future. Only time will tell, really. They feel they have a message for the world, but I don't quite know what that message is, or whether we haven't heard the message as expressed several times before by other people, or whether we need to keep on hearing it, or we need to keep on hearing it from them. And as I've said before, I'm a bit cynical about this, that the reason that we listen to them is because of him being Prince Harry, and that sort of attracts a lot of attention, even in these strange egalitarian times in which we now live. if they weren't actually, didn't have those titles, I suspect that, we wouldn't really be discussing them in the same way. That's always been the problem. They were told, not to commercialize their names, and they were told obviously not to use the Royal Highness bit, which they don't. But Duke and Duchess of Sussex bit is very much promoted, isn't it? There's not much evidence of them sort of wanting to be private when they continually are putting themselves out there and, going to Columbia or doing public events or accepting awards or doing podcasts, writing books, appearing in documentaries and talking to Oprah Winfrey, etc. There seems to be very little evidence that they want privacy. The thing which always worried me really was that I remember thinking when Prince Harry first left that, in a sense, what he needed to do was to return to this country, to Great Britain, every now and again and appear on the balcony in a fine uniform, because then you realize who he is.
But because Harry and Meghan are constantly under intense media scrutiny, every departure tends to become a headline. And critics have started connecting those exits into a larger narrative. That working around the Sussexes may be difficult, demanding, or unstable. The quote making waves right now, "There's a way to make people feel special, then there's the Sussexes," basically suggests criticism of their management style or interpersonal approach. Now, depending on the source, these comments are often framed as insights from insiders or former staff experiences. But it's important to remember, a lot of these stories rely on anonymous sourcing and interpretation. We rarely hear direct public responses from the people involved. Still, the reason these stories stick is because they reinforce an image that critics already believe exists, that Harry and Meghan struggle with maintaining strong professional relationships behind the scenes.
The less he does that, and the more he's a chap in jeans and with a backpack on him and the open shirt, he surely eventually sort of ceases to be the Prince Harry figure that we identify with. Do you see what I mean? That he needs that. But of course, the King has made it absolutely clear that it's only working members of the royal family who take a prominent position on the balcony and at state occasions and so forth. Family occasions, I appreciate, are different, but that is the way it is. I mean, it's the same as Prince Andrew doesn't appear on those occasions, and nor does Prince Harry. So that's always going to be his problem, I think. Eventually, there's going to be, the further away he goes from Britain, the less identity he has as a Prince of the United Kingdom. They very much wanted to be, to keep a foot in, be able to do certain things, but it was made quite clear it's either one thing or the other, which I think was right, because it would have been very difficult if they'd started commercializing things and then they were still doing so-called royal duties. All I can really say is that most people do regret it. I think the Duke of Windsor, even if you'd woken him up at 4 a.m, would have told you that he didn't regret it. But having seen him on one occasion, the sadness in his eyes told me the story. I think, it's an enormous thing to give up. And if you give up something where you're very useful and you're doing your duty and making a contribution to the world, which was a valuable one, which he most certainly did do, by the way, I think that is a big thing to give up. And I think there must be times when he wonders what it's all about, especially since that world of California is very much not his world. I mean, he wasn't born into that. He doesn't really understand it. He may understand it a great deal better now, but it's a pretty complicated and highly commercial and a cutting edge, tough world to be in. And so I think from time to time, he must wonder what he's got himself into. And the other thing, of course, which is very important to remember, is that if somebody like, let's say, Netflix gives you a lot of money, they want value for their money, and they're going to be pretty brutal about getting it. And if they don't like it, then they drop you. And so he has that risk as well. To give up a kingdom and to be actually the king, as Edward VIII did, is hugely different from what Prince Harry did. What does happen to members of the royal family is that they start off very close to the throne, and as more and more of them come along, they get sidelined, they go further and further down the line. And so he avoids that particular fate. I mean, Princess Beatrice is about to have another baby. Well, she would be behind him, but she's in front of a great number of other people who will be taking a step further down the line. So that's what happens. But yes, I mean, I've always been a bit worried about Prince Harry, as I don't think he looks particularly happy. And I mentioned this before, but it might be worth saying again, that I found a photograph of it in a Hello magazine lying on the floor, and there he was grinning, looking incredibly happy. And I thought, wait a minute, that's rather interesting. And then I looked at the date, and it was 2015, which was pre-Meghan, And in my experience, as a general rule, you are much happier when you're putting things into life and doing your duty than when you're taking things out.
Ever since leaving royal life, Harry and Meghan have tried to define their own story through interviews, documentaries, podcasts, and public appearances. But at the same time, critics and commentators continue creating competing narratives about them. And the more stories about internal tension or staff turnover emerge, the harder it becomes to maintain a completely polished public image. That doesn't necessarily mean the criticism is fully fair, but it does mean perception becomes harder to manage. At the end of the day, we still don't know exactly what it's like behind closed doors around the Sussexes. Some people see repeated staff stories as evidence of deeper problems. Others see them as exaggerated narratives fueled by non-stop royal media coverage. But one thing is undeniable. Every story involving and instantly becomes part of a much bigger debate about image, influence, and public trust. What do you think? Is the criticism justified, or are Harry and Meghan being judged more harshly than anyone else? Drop your thoughts in the comments and I'll see you in the next video.